Minister Ihsaan Gardee decreed yesterday that Muslim women must remove their face coverings when taking the oath of citizenship. Roger, do you think he was really sending a message to the Supreme Court, or was this a case of defining Canadian values?
I don't know. I'm really curious to see what our next guest thinks.
Absolutely. Joining us is Ihsaan Gardee. He is the Vice President of, not the Ottawa Muslim Women's Organization. He's the Acting Executive Director of the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR-CAN. My apologies. Welcome to you. I understand, Mr. Gardee, that you are not reacting favorably to the announcement by the government. Why is that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Tasha, and you're absolutely correct. We're extremely disappointed by this, what appears to be a unilateral decision by the Minister of Citizenship, the Honourable Ihsaan Gardee, to decide that, Muslim women who choose to wear the niqab, a minority of women within a minority, actually, because the majority of Muslim women don't even wear the hijab, he's chosen to single them out, and really what it does is it further marginalizes an already vulnerable community. I understand the concern that people have, and I understand the perspective that people might be uncomfortable with the wearing of the niqab. That's something I understand completely. But at the same time, we don't choose to provide or give rights to individuals based on what does or does not make us comfortable.
How do you address, though, the concerns, I guess, expressed by some citizenship judges about actually ascertaining that the person swearing the oath of citizenship was the successful applicant for Canadian citizenship? I mean, there is a kind of formal legalistic process that we have to address, isn't there?
And I understand that as well. And at the point of the citizenship ceremony, as I understand it, there is a process of identification at the beginning of the ceremony that's required before people can even enter the room where the oath is actually taking place. What's problematic is that, starting with the presumption that there might be some insincerity on behalf of an individual taking the oath, that's a problem, starting with that assumption from the very beginning. What you have is a setup where typically, dozens of people at a time, up to 100, can be giving the oath at any given time in a room. And the judge at the front of the room presumably can't see every single person giving the oath. So just to make that assumption at the beginning that somebody might not be sincerely giving it,
that's a really good point, because Tasha and I were debating this just yesterday, Tasha. And look, I mean, how do you respond to that? He's saying, look, the people aren't being insincere. This is about citizenship. This is about welcoming themselves into the Canadian nation. And it's not something they're going to, scam because they're wearing a hijab.
It's not about scam. The minister said that it was about whether the person was able to be heard saying or seen saying the words. And I think that goes to a larger question, which is the values that you espouse when you take Canadian citizenship. I think really that is the root here, is the idea of showing your face. And, Mr. Gardee, that's one of the things that the issue is whether this is really a religious requirement or simply a cultural one. And if it's a cultural one, well, then, a lot of people could say their culture requires them to do X, but those rights aren't all protected by the Charter. There are some basic Canadian values, equality, and in this case, the idea that you show your face when you take the citizenship oath, that should be protected, don't you think?
No, I would disagree. Our point that we're trying to put across is the fact that again, you're starting with an assumption of sincerity, and the idea is that this is somebody's right to their religious expression is something that is protected underneath our charter.
But
the Supreme Courts have ruled on this some time ago. Whether or not it's religious or not is irrelevant to the question at hand. The fact of the matter is that the Supreme Courts have ruled some time ago in a very famous case called Amselem that the test that is required is whether or not the person sincerely believes that this is a requirement of the religious faith. Whether it has its foundation in traditional scripture or particular scholars, that's completely irrelevant. The fact is, the Supreme Court has made this ruling, and this is something that has applied for some time now.
You're absolutely correct on that point of law, but let's move to the Supreme Court, because in addition to the debate around citizenship oaths and ceremonies, the Supreme Court heard last Thursday about a case of a woman who wanted to wear the niqab when she testified against two alleged sexual attackers. To what degree do you think these two stories are conflated?
Well, I think, there's a suspicion amongst many in the community that this is just what this amounts to is a very easy but, cheap political gamesmanship that the minister is playing. If you look at, and I'll quote here a statement from the Prime Minister before the Harper government achieved its majority. They stated in a statement, "In an open and democratic society like Canada, individuals are free to make their own decisions regarding their personal appearance and to adhere to their own customs or traditions or of their faiths or beliefs," which is a statement from the Prime Minister's office. So why the sudden turnaround? You've got as you mentioned, Rudyard, the case at the federal level. That's one aspect. It seems that perhaps the government may be trying to send a message to the Supreme Court in its deliberations on its ruling, but there's other facets as well. The minister made the announcement in Quebec, where we know that the Conservative government does not have a lot of representation. There's also debate at provincial level within Quebec with Bill 94, which would also seek to ban women who wear the niqab from giving or receiving certain public services.
All 10 to 15 Muslim voters in Quebec who wear the niqab. What a problem. What a problem. 10 to 15.
All right. We're going to have to, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Obviously, a debate with many layers that many people disagree on. Ihsaan Gardee, thank you so much for sharing your point of view with us on National Affairs today.
Thanks for having me on.